Assault in my home. My mother secretly helped my sister break in and hire a thug to attack me in my own house to take my grandchild away, but I have recording evidence and am determined to put both of them in jail. My name is Eleanor Vance. I live in a quiet, upscale suburb of Denver, Colorado, and my world revolves around my 2-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Lily is the daughter of my youngest child, Chloe. Tragically, Chloe died in a car accident 6 months ago. Since then, I've been Lily's sole guardian, raising her in the loving home Chloe grew up in. The peace of my life was shattered by my older daughter, Vivian. Vivian is a troubled soul, unstable, deeply jealous of Chloe, and possessing a history of substance abuse. The moment Chloe passed, Vivian initiated a custody battle, claiming she was the superior choice for Lily's guardian. The court quickly dismissed her petition due to her checkered history, granting me full legal custody. Vivian didn't stop there. She became obsessed. She would harass me with texts, stand outside my house, and scream threats about taking Lily. I installed a complete state-of-the-art security system, including interior cameras, because I didn't trust her. The deepest wound, however, came from my own mother, Patricia. My mother has always favored Vivian, excusing her worst behaviors and blaming me for every family crisis. Patricia vehemently sided with Vivian in the custody battle, claiming I was too old and too possessive. The night the attack happened, I was upstairs in Lily's nursery. It was 8:30 p.m. I was rocking Lily to sleep, humming a gentle lullaby, feeling the familiar warmth and safety of our routine. My security system sent an alert to my phone, backdoor sensor activated. I froze. I hadn't armed the system for the evening yet, but I hadn't opened the back door either. I immediately pulled up the live feed from the kitchen camera. What I saw made my blood run cold. My mother, Patricia, was standing in my kitchen. She had a key, but she must have used a spare she shouldn't have possessed or picked the lock. I didn't know how she got in, but she was there. She was fiddling with the interior security panel near the kitchen door, manually disabling the living room and hallway cameras. Then she unlocked the deadbolt on the kitchen door and stepped back. A hulking stranger wearing a dark hoodie slipped into my house. "The baby's upstairs. She's in the nursery," Patricia whispered urgently to the man. "Eleanor is up there with her. I need you to grab the baby, and you need to make sure Eleanor doesn't follow." The thug nodded once. Patricia then gave him a small, dark object. "Use this if you have to. Vivian is waiting in the car 2 blocks over. Get out fast." Patricia quickly slipped back out the door, locking it behind her, leaving the man alone in my home. She had provided the access, the details, and the weapon, and she had left me to face the consequences. I didn't wait to see the man move toward the stairs. I was already sprinting to the nursery door. I locked it, threw a heavy chest against it, and grabbed Lily from her crib. My priority was Lily's safety. I ran to the phone on the changing table and dialed 911, my voice shaking with adrenaline and rage. "I need the police now. There is an intruder in my house. He was let in by my mother. He's trying to kidnap my granddaughter." I looked at the interior nanny cam in the nursery. Thank God it ran on a separate Wi-Fi loop. The camera was recording everything. The sound of heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs, my frantic call, and my heart-wrenching fear as I tried to calm the crying child in my arms. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The man began violently rattling the knob. I had the video evidence of my mother's complicity, the audio of the 911 call, and the nanny cam recording of the ensuing terror. My determination was absolute. My mother and my sister were not just estranged family, they were criminals, and I was going to ensure both of them paid for their actions. The police arrived within 3 minutes, sirens wailing, a terrifying sound in my quiet suburban neighborhood. I was huddled in the nursery closet, Lily whimpering silently against my chest. The officers quickly secured the house. The back door was still unlocked, confirming the intruder's entry point. The thug was gone, having fled out the back after failing to breach the nursery door, likely hearing the sirens approaching. The only evidence left behind was a faint acrid smell and a small dark cylinder the man had dropped, the item my mother Patricia had handed him. It was a canister of pepper spray. The evidence collection. The police took my initial statement, which was emotional but clear. My mother Patricia had opened the door for a hired assailant with the intent of kidnapping my granddaughter Lily for my sister Vivian. The crucial evidence was already secured. The nanny cam. The nursery camera recorded my frantic 911 call, the sounds of the man violently shaking the locked door, and his retreat. 2. The kitchen camera. This footage was the linchpin. It clearly showed Patricia manually disabling the downstairs security, unlocking the back door, conferring with the male thug, handing him the pepper spray canister, and instructing him on Lily's location. The police classified the incident as attempted kidnapping, burglary, and assault. They took the pepper spray canister as physical evidence, but their immediate focus was finding the 3 perpetrators. The evasive sisters. I told the police exactly where Vivian and Patricia would be, Vivian likely hiding out at her current boyfriend's apartment, and Patricia retreating to her own home a few towns over. The police attempted to interview both women that night. Vivian was nowhere to be found. Her boyfriend claimed he hadn't seen her in days, and her phone was turned off. She was clearly in the wind, fearing the immediate fallout. Patricia was found at her home. When questioned, she offered a slick, practiced denial, a performance perfected over years of enabling Vivian. "I had nothing to do with this, officer. she claimed tearfully. My granddaughter Lily is the victim of a terrible situation. I was worried about Eleanor's mental state after Chloe's death, so I went to check on her. I must have left the back door unlocked by accident. And that man, I've never seen him before in my life. He must have slipped in right after I left. The police, obligated to give her the benefit of the doubt without immediate arrest, had to accept her statement for the time being. However, they informed her that the security footage was being processed and she was a prime suspect in a felony case. A new layer of fear. My lawyer, whom I called immediately, was appalled. Eleanor, you need to understand the difficulty here. We have your mother on camera, but she is claiming a mistake. If we can't tie her to the hired thug, her lawyer will argue it was a tragic coincidence, a random criminal slipping in when she carelessly left the door open. She handed him the weapon, I exclaimed. We need to identify that man, my lawyer insisted, and we need a sworn statement from the thug that Vivian hired him and that Patricia assisted. The next morning, the police returned. They had run the facial recognition software against the grainy footage of the male intruder but found no match. He was a professional, likely a hired hand who had never been in the system. Worse, I received a chilling anonymous text message. Drop the charges. You won't win this. You're alone and you're making enemies you can't fight. The message confirmed my worst fear: they were still watching. Even with the police involved, my mother, my sister, and the man they hired were actively trying to intimidate me into silence. But I was not alone. I had the incontrovertible digital evidence of their crime, and I was determined to use it to expose my family and ensure they went to jail for their monstrous attack. The police investigation stalled after the initial sweep, while the security footage was damning Patricia's plausible denial. I left the door unlocked by accident and was checking on my daughter's mental health, gave her just enough legal cover. The district attorney needed something irrefutable to link Patricia and Vivian directly to the hired thug who remained unidentified. I realized the police were constrained by procedure, but I was not. I had to pivot from being a victim to being an investigator. My priority was finding the link that connected the three conspirators. Hiding in plain sight. I moved Lily and myself to a safe, undisclosed location, a rental property 2 hours away, to ensure Lily's safety. I armed my lawyer with all the video and audio evidence while I focused on the digital trail. My sister Vivian was impulsive and reckless. She wouldn't have hired a thug without leaving a digital trace. She wouldn't use her known accounts, but I knew her habits. I hired a private digital forensics specialist, a highly recommended ex-FBI agent named Rob Vance. No relation, thankfully. I gave him access to every piece of digital data related to Vivian that I could legally obtain: old shared email accounts, her social media dumps, and cell phone records predating the custody battle. Rob focused on the communication patterns in the week leading up to the attack. Vivian is smart enough to use burner phones or encrypted apps for the actual hiring, Rob explained during a secure video call. But she's not smart enough to change her pattern of communication. She would have contacted her mother right before and right after the drop-off. The key location data. The breakthrough came from my mother's data, which the police had initially dismissed. Patricia, being older, was less tech-savvy. She used her personal cell phone constantly and, crucially, never turned off her GPS location services. Rob cross-referenced Patricia's cell phone location data with the time of the break-in: 8:30 p.m. 7:45 p.m. Patricia's phone was located at her home address. 8:30 p.m. Patricia's phone was located at a rest stop on the interstate 30 minutes from my house. 8:20 p.m. Patricia's phone arrived at my suburban neighborhood, confirming her presence just minutes before the camera recorded her entering the house. This proved she was at the scene, which she admitted, but Rob found an anomaly at the rest stop. Look at this, Eleanor, Rob said, highlighting the data. At 8:05 p.m., while Patricia's phone was sitting stationary in the parking lot of that rest stop, there was a brief anonymous text message exchange with a temporary unregistered VoIP number. The exchange lasted less than 20 seconds. The timing was crucial. Patricia drove 20 minutes from the rest stop to my house, arriving at 8:20 p.m. The exchange happened exactly when she would have been meeting someone to coordinate the final details. Patricia didn't just meet the thug at my house, I realized. She met him at the rest stop beforehand. That exchange wasn't about an accidental key. It was the final handoff, the anonymous ad. The last piece of the puzzle came from Vivian's old laptop data. Rob found a recently created encrypted folder that Vivian had attempted to delete completely. Inside, he recovered a draft of an anonymous online advertisement posted to a fringe website commonly used for black market services. The ad, dated 1 week before the attack, was seeking a private security consultant for a discrete family matter and offered a significant cash payout for an extraction. The text of the ad ended with a chilling instruction: must be available for a meeting near I-70 on the evening of date of the attack. The location, I-70, the interstate near the rest stop, perfectly matched Patricia's location data. The timing matched the anonymous text message. Vivian had placed the ad, Patricia had met the thug to coordinate the final steps, and I had the digital alibi connecting them all. I immediately handed the entire forensic packet, the location data, the recovered AD, and the cross-referencing analysis to the district attorney's office. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a premeditated conspiracy to commit a felony. The forensic evidence I provided, Patricia's GPS data showing the clandestine rest stop meeting coupled with Vivian's recovered online ad specifically soliciting an extraction, was the concrete link the district attorney DA needed. The DA's office moved quickly formally, filing charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, burglary, and criminal solicitation against both Patricia, my mother, and Vivian, my sister. The arrests, Patricia, due to her immediate cooperation, her immediate denial, was arrested at her home the next morning. She was booked, fingerprinted, and released on a massive bond. The sight of my own mother, the woman who had brought me into the world, facing felony charges because she chose her favored daughter's malice over her other daughter's safety, was heartbreakingly surreal. Vivian was still in hiding. The arrest warrant placed pressure on her network, however, and 2 days later she surrendered to the police in a neighboring county, flanked by a powerful, high-priced defense attorney. She was also released on bond, prohibited from contacting me or Lily. The threat of prison was now real for both of them, but so was the ensuing legal war. The defense strategy. Vivian and Patricia hired a joint defense team attempting to present a unified front. Their strategy was clear: they would focus on undermining the reliability of my evidence and my character. Their defense attorney, Mr. Stern, publicly attacked my narrative. He argued that the nanny cam footage was a gross invasion of privacy and that the recovered online ad was unattributed. Most viciously, he argued that I was an overprotective and unstable guardian who was fabricating a conspiracy out of grief over Chloe's death, trying to unfairly punish my family. The core of their defense lay with Patricia. Her lawyers would swear she never met the thug and that the GPS coordinates simply showed her stopping for coffee on her long, worried drive to check on her daughter. I knew I needed a final, irrefutable piece of evidence to break them, something that went beyond location data and into their intent. The pressure point. The thug. The unidentified male assailant, the thug, remained the key. He was the only person who could testify that Vivian hired him and Patricia coordinated the meeting. I met with Rob Vance, my private investigator, again. Rob, the DA, won't offer immunity to the thug unless he's a guaranteed capture. We need to find him or find the account Vivian used to pay him. Rob had already been working that angle. He focused on the anonymous VoIP number that Patricia briefly contacted at the rest stop. That number was used one other time, Rob revealed, pointing to a file. It made one call after the attack, a 3-second outgoing call to a small cash-only check cashing store in a less savory part of town roughly an hour after the assault. The number was then deactivated. Why a check cashing store? Because cash is king for this kind of work, Eleanor. It's untraceable, but they have to cash the checks somewhere if they don't trust the bank. The check cashing store would have security cameras and records of who cashed a large personal check in the hours following the assault. The light bulb went on. Vivian wouldn't have used her own business account, but she had a trust fund from her father. She likely wrote a personal check, a massive oversight due to her arrogance. I immediately handed the check cashing store information and the time frame over to the DA's office, who now had the full force of police authority to obtain warrants. The police found what we needed. The store's camera footage captured a clear image of the unidentified male thug cashing a substantial personal check signed by Vivian Reed. The name and address of the thug were immediately identified from the transaction record. The three conspirators were now undeniably linked. Vivian wrote the check, the thug cashed it, and Patricia met the thug and let him into my home. The only question now was whose nerve would break first when facing prison time. The identification and subsequent arrest of the male assailant, Mark the Fixer, Jensen completely dismantled the defense strategy of Patricia and Vivian. Mr. Stern, their high-priced attorney, could no longer claim coincidence. The forged intent was now tied to a signed check in a hired hand. The district attorney's office, bolstered by the irrefutable evidence, elevated the charges against all three: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, a serious felony carrying significant prison time. Jensen flips. The weakest link was always the hired thug. Jensen was a career criminal, but not a kidnapping specialist. When presented with the video of him cashing Vivian's check and the police finding the dropped pepper spray canister at the scene, he immediately knew his only path to survival was cooperation. Jensen's lawyer contacted the DA and offered a deal: full disclosure of the conspiracy, the names of his employers, Vivian and Patricia, and a full sworn statement detailing the plan in exchange for a drastically reduced sentence for the lesser charges of burglary and assault. Jensen's sworn statement was the prosecution's smoking gun. He confirmed Vivian hired him via the online ad and paid him with the personal check. He confirmed Patricia met him at the rest stop to vet him and hand over the key and the pepper spray canister. He confirmed Patricia explicitly instructed him to grab the baby and make sure Eleanor couldn't follow, a chilling confirmation of the violent intent. This testimony completely negated Patricia's claim of an accidental open door. She was an active co-conspirator. The retreat. The moment Jensen's plea deal was finalized and the defense team received the deposition, chaos erupted. Mr. Stern, their attorney, demanded an emergency meeting with the DA to discuss a lesser charge, but the DA refused, smelling a guaranteed conviction. Vivian, realizing the only person who could testify to the precise details of her plan had flipped, panicked. Her high society arrogance evaporated. She was facing decades in prison. Vivian violated the terms of her bond. She liquidated her assets, abandoned her current boyfriend, and fled the state, becoming a fugitive. An arrest warrant was issued for bail jumping. Patricia's isolation. Vivian's flight left Patricia completely isolated. Her favored daughter, the reason she had risked everything, had abandoned her to face the full force of the law alone. I was notified by my lawyer that Patricia's defense counsel was now attempting to negotiate a separate deal. Patricia's only possible defense was to claim she was manipulated by her unstable fugitive daughter and had acted under duress, a defense that was legally weak but emotionally desperate. I received a tearful, rambling letter from my mother smuggled through a neutral third party, her priest. Eleanor, you need to understand. Vivian was so unstable. She threatened to hurt herself if I didn't help her get Lily. I didn't want to hurt you, I just didn't want to lose Vivian. Please, I beg you, tell the DA that I was just a worried mother. Don't let me go to jail. Her letter was a final act of self-pity, shifting the blame to Vivian's instability while entirely minimizing the trauma she inflicted on me and Lily. The betrayal was still absolute. I handed the letter directly to my lawyer. She's trying to manipulate me into compromising the case. Use this as evidence of her continued intent to obstruct justice. She doesn't feel remorse. She feels entitled to my forgiveness. I was done being the victim, and done being the forgiving daughter. I had the thug's testimony, the camera footage, and the fugitive status of my sister. My goal was no longer just the recovery of my peace, but the final public reckoning for the family members who tried to destroy my life. Vivian's flight was the final catastrophic mistake. It exposed the rot in the conspiracy and left Patricia completely vulnerable. With the threat of a guaranteed conviction hanging over her, Patricia's attorney, seeing no viable defense against the overwhelming evidence, initiated serious plea negotiations. The mother's plea. Patricia's lawyer presented the DA's office with a plea deal focused on minimizing jail time. The offer was a guilty plea to criminal solicitation and conspiracy to commit burglary, dropping the attempted kidnapping charge, a full payment of restitution for all my legal and security costs, and a massive community service commitment. The DA accepted the plea to the lesser felonies but insisted on one non-negotiable term, a sentence that included jail time. The egregious nature of the crime, using a hired thug to invade a home and assault a family member, required a penalty that served as a deterrent. I met with the DA to discuss the terms. We have to accept that Patricia will not get a sentence as severe as Vivian would have, the DA explained. But we have secured a definitive felony conviction and a period of incarceration. She will serve actual time, Eleanor. This is justice. I agreed. The certainty of a felony conviction and jail time, regardless of the length, was the public acknowledgement of her crime that I needed. Patricia pleaded guilty, avoiding a messy public trial that would have further traumatized me. Her sentencing was set for the following month. Tracking the fugitive. With Patricia dealt with, the full force of the investigation turned to the primary aggressor, Vivian. Because she jumped bail, she was now a federal fugitive, a much higher priority for law enforcement. I was working with Rob Vance, my PI, to track her down. We knew she wouldn't use her own money or contacts, so we focused on the only person still loyal to her, her boyfriend Thomas. Vivian left in a panic, Eleanor. Rob analyzed. She liquidated her liquid assets, but she left behind some key financial ties. Her boyfriend Thomas still lives in Denver, and he's still making payments on the expensive car Vivian drives. We monitored Thomas's phone and bank activity under a new warrant. 2 weeks later, Thomas took a sudden, untraced train trip followed by an untraceable cash withdrawal from an out-of-state ATM. The location of the withdrawal was key. A small, isolated town near the Canadian border in Montana. Vivian was making a desperate dash for the border, trying to slip out of the country before her felony charges and bail-jumping warrant could catch her. I immediately provided the location and the new evidence to the DA's office, who coordinated with the U.S. Marshals. The capture. The U.S. Marshals moved quickly. They apprehended Vivian in a cheap motel parking lot only a few miles from the Canadian border crossing. She was arrested without incident and immediately extradited back to Colorado to face the original felony charges plus the new serious charge of bail jumping. Vivian was taken into custody without the possibility of bond. She was now sitting in a county jail cell awaiting trial, abandoned by her mother and facing the maximum penalty. The feeling was profound. For the first time in years, the threat was gone. My family members were both behind Barsone by negotiated plea and the other by overwhelming failure. I focused on my granddaughter Lily. I had not just protected her, I had secured her future by removing the dangerous instability of the two people who sought to seize her by violence. The next step was the sentencing hearing, the final public reckoning for my mother. The day of my mother Patricia's sentencing hearing arrived. This was the final formal conclusion of her part in the conspiracy. She had pleaded guilty to criminal solicitation and conspiracy to commit burglary, and the terms included jail time and full restitution. I knew this hearing would be deeply painful. It was a formal severing of the mother-daughter bond, replacing it with the legal record of criminal and victim. The sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed not with family, my remaining relatives had wisely distanced themselves, but with media and observers drawn to the spectacle of an elderly woman pleading guilty to hiring a thug to attack her own daughter. Patricia's appearance was a stark contrast to her previous arrogance. She was pale-dressed in a muted suit and looked every bit her age, defeated and terrified. Her defense attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a distraught grandmother manipulated by her unstable daughter Vivian, the fugitive who made a single desperate, misguided error in judgment fueled by grief over Chloe. They pleaded for probation and community service, emphasizing her clean record and age. Then the judge called upon me to deliver my victim impact statement. I walked to the podium carrying a sheaf of papers. I did not look at Patricia. My voice was low, clear, and steady. Your Honor, I am Eleanor Vance. I am the mother of Chloe, and I am the legal guardian of Lily. I am here not just as the victim of a crime, but as a person whose entire family was destroyed by malice and jealousy. I detailed the events, not just the night of the attack, but the preceding months of harassment and the failed custody battle. The night my mother unlocked my door and let a stranger into my home, she didn't just violate a security system. She violated the sacred trust between a mother and daughter. I stated, she didn't just commit burglary, she hired a thug to commit assault and kidnapping against me and my 2-year-old granddaughter. She handed that man the pepper spray and explicitly told him to make sure Eleanor couldn't follow. This was not a mistake of grief. It was a cold, calculated betrayal. I then addressed the most crucial point, the impact on Lily and me. For 6 months after the attack, I lived in fear. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on private security, forced to abandon my home, all because my own mother chose to side with the violent ambitions of her favored child. She did not just attack me. She attacked the memory of my deceased daughter Chloe and risked the life of her granddaughter Lily. I paused and finally looked directly at Patricia, who was openly weeping. Your Honor, I concluded, the woman who sits here today is not a victim. She is a criminal who acted with premeditation and malice. She endangered a child and violated every legal and moral boundary to support her own prejudice. She deserves the full maximum penalty to ensure that she and anyone else who seeks to hurt me or my family understands that this is where the cycle of violence and entitlement ends. The sentence. The judge delivered a stern and unambiguous ruling. He acknowledged Patricia's age and lack of prior offenses, but emphasized the severity of the planned home invasion and the involvement of a child. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years in state prison with a portion of that time suspended. She was also ordered to pay the full amount of restitution for all legal security and relocation costs I incurred, and was issued a permanent strict restraining order prohibiting her from having any contact with me or Lily even after her release. The court was silent as Patricia was led away by the bailiffs, her cries muffled by the courtroom doors. She was gone. I walked out of the courthouse, the media swarming me. I did not stop to comment. I had justice, but I felt only an immense hollow relief. The mother who raised me was now a convicted felon. The next battle, however, was looming: the trial of Mark Jensen, the thug, and the extradition and trial of the fugitive Vivian. The hardest fight was still to come. With Patricia convicted and sentenced, the legal focus shifted to securing the convictions of the remaining 2 co-conspirators, Mark Jensen, the hired thug, and Vivian, the fugitive sister, now extradited. The first step was the sentencing of Jensen, who had flipped and agreed to testify. The thug's sentencing, Mark Jensen's sentencing, was less about retribution and more about judicial efficiency. Per his plea agreement, he pleaded guilty to burglary and simple assault, significantly reduced from the initial kidnapping charges, in exchange for his full detailed testimony against Vivian. The judge, recognizing Jensen's cooperation was vital for securing the conviction of the main architects, sentenced him to a relatively short prison term, emphasizing that his testimony was serving the greater good of justice. Jensen's lawyer submitted the sworn testimony to the court, a transcript that detailed every malicious step of the conspiracy. Vivian Reed stated she wanted the child removed from Eleanor Vance's custody and that the mother, Patricia Reed, would ensure clear access. Patricia Reed gave me the key and told me to use the spray if Eleanor got in the way, but not to hurt the baby. They knew exactly what they were doing. Jensen's statement was the nail in Vivian's coffin. It removed any possibility of her defense, claiming she only intended to scare me or retrieve the child peacefully. The inclusion of the pepper spray and the explicit instruction to disable me proved malicious intent and planning. Vivian's return and strategy. Vivian was successfully extradited from Montana, arriving back in Denver in chains. She was denied bond due to the felony charges and the extreme flight risk demonstrated by her bail jumping. She was forced to hire a new publicly funded defense attorney. Vivian's defense strategy was one of extreme desperation. 1. Mental instability. Her lawyer argued that Vivian was driven by a deep pathological desire to parent her deceased sister's child and was suffering from post-grief psychosis, rendering her incapable of forming criminal intent. 2. Blame shifting. She would argue that Patricia was the true orchestrator, using her influence and emotional manipulation to pressure Vivian into the plan, and that the hired thug Jensen was acting solely on Patricia's violent instructions. I knew this was a lie designed to confuse the jury. Vivian had always been the main source of the malice and the architect of the custody fight. Preparing for trial. The DA informed me that Vivian's case was headed for a full jury trial. Unlike Patricia's negotiated plea, Vivian was determined to fight gambling that a jury would sympathize with a grieving sister, even one who broke the law. I spent weeks with the DA and my legal team preparing for my testimony. We reviewed all the evidence. The kitchen camera footage showing Patricia handing the pepper spray to Jensen. Jensen's sworn testimony directly implicating Vivian as the employer. Vivian's check used to pay Jensen. Vivian's fleeing the state, which demonstrated consciousness of guilt. My final task was the most difficult, reviewing the full nursery nanny cam footage. This was the raw, terrifying video of the moments the thug tried to break down the door, capturing my genuine terror as I cradled Lily. My lawyer advised the DA to use this footage at trial. It's the only way the jury fully understands the level of premeditation and violence involved. It turns this from a piece of paper into the nightmare Eleanor lived through. I agreed. I knew facing Vivian in court would be agonizing, but showing the jury the raw reality of the crime, my own mother and sister using violence to steal my granddaughter, was the only way to ensure the final absolute justice Lily deserved. The trial of Vivian Reed became the intense final legal battle. It was a vicious public display of family breakdown covered relentlessly by the local media. Vivian's defense was indeed to portray herself as a mentally broken, grief-stricken sister manipulated by her controlling mother, Patricia. The prosecution, however, had the overwhelming weight of physical and digital evidence. The prosecution's case. The district attorney DA laid out the conspiracy in chronological, devastating detail. 1. Motive. Eleanor's secure legal guardianship of Lily fueling Vivian's jealousy and obsession. 2. Solicitation. The recovery of Vivian's online ad seeking an extraction consultant, the thug. 3. The transaction. The use of Vivian's personal check to pay Mark Jensen, the hired thug. 4. The conspiracy. The reading of Jensen's sworn testimony detailing that Vivian was the primary employer and Patricia provided the access and weapon, the pepper spray, to assault Eleanor. 5. Consciousness of guilt. The evidence of Vivian's bail jumping and flight toward the Canadian border. My testimony was the emotional centerpiece. I stood on the witness stand, faced my sister, and recounted the entire terrifying night, from seeing my mother on the kitchen camera to locking myself and Lily in the closet as the stranger pounded on the door. I looked at Vivian only once, stating clearly that her actions were not those of a loving sister but a jealous, calculated criminal. The nanny cam footage. The moment the DA introduced the nursery nanny cam footage was the turning point. The courtroom lights dimmed and the jury watched the raw, unedited footage. Lily's whimpers, my frantic, trembling voice calling 911, and the distinct, violent sound of the hired thug slamming his body against the locked nursery door. The footage shattered Vivian's defense of misguided retrieval. It was an audio-visual record of violent intent. Several jurors were visibly distressed, and the defense attorney's cross-examination was reduced to weak challenges about the camera's angle and my state of mind. Vivian's testimony. Vivian took the stand in her own defense. She cried, apologized to the jury, and wept about her grief over Chloe. She admitted to writing the check but claimed it was for security consultation, and that her mother, Patricia, had escalated the situation without her knowledge. However, the prosecution tore her apart during cross-examination. Prosecutor Miss Reed, if your intent was to retrieve your niece peacefully, why did you pay an unknown man with a criminal history to meet your mother at a highway rest stop and not simply petition the court again? Vivian, I was desperate. Prosecutor, and when you heard your mother, Patricia Reed, was arrested for aiding in this felony, did you rush to clear her name? No, Ms. Reed. You emptied your bank accounts and fled the state, demonstrating that you knew you were the one truly guilty of the crime. The defense had no credible answer. Vivian's lies and self-pity could not stand against the check, the camera, and the testimony of her own hired accomplice. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. I was sitting with my lawyer when the court clerk announced the verdict. The foreman stood and delivered the ruling on the 3 major counts. Count 1, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Guilty. Count 2, burglary of a dwelling. Guilty. Count 3, criminal solicitation. Guilty. Vivian's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She collapsed in tears, screaming that the jury had been misled. The court was brought to order, and she was remanded into custody, officially convicted on all major felony charges. I felt the immense weight of the last 2 years lift from my shoulders. It was over. Both my mother and my sister were now convicted felons, their violent attempt to steal Lily thwarted, and their crimes acknowledged by the full force of the law. The only remaining step was Vivian's sentencing, the final absolute conclusion to the family tragedy. The conviction of Vivian Reed on all major felony counts, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, burglary, and criminal solicitations, and a final powerful tremor through the remnants of my family. It confirmed the truth: their actions were not a desperate mistake, but a calculated crime. The final sentencing. 6 weeks after the verdict, Vivian appeared for her sentencing. Unlike Patricia's hearing, this was a sterile, purely judicial affair. Vivian, still defiant, offered a final muted apology to the court but reserved her deepest resentment for me. The judge, referencing the testimony of the hired thug, the severity of the planned home invasion, and Vivian's egregious act of bail jumping, delivered a sentence commensurate with the maximum end of the guidelines. Vivian was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. She was ordered to serve a significant portion of that time before being eligible for parole. The judge also issued a permanent no-contact restraining order that barred her from contacting me or Lily upon her eventual release. The court made a final powerful statement. Ms. Reed, the court views the use of a hired assailant to terrorize and attack a family member in their own home for the purpose of kidnapping a child as an act of profound and disturbing malice. Your sentence reflects the necessary protection of the victim and the community. Vivian was led away. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a calm, resolute certainty. She was gone. The aftermath and restitution. With the criminal cases concluded, I settled the financial fallout. The court ordered both Patricia and Vivian to pay full restitution, which, while largely symbolic for Vivian, was enforced against Patricia's assets. The funds reimbursed every penny I spent on legal fees, private security, and relocation. I used a small portion of the settlement money to tear out the kitchen door and security panel my mother had tampered with. I replaced them with a reinforced smart-locked system and updated the security cameras throughout the house. The changes were physical, but they symbolized a spiritual cleansing, the removal of the last tangible trace of their violation. The final severance. My lawyer advised me to file a wrongful death, negligent infliction of emotional distress lawsuit against both Patricia and Vivian, which would legally and permanently bar them from ever claiming any financial interest in Lily's future inheritance or trust fund. It was a final legal severing of all ties. I won by default judgment. Lily and I returned home. The first night back, I walked her to the nursery. The room was safe, bright, and familiar. I rocked her, singing the same lullaby I was singing the night of the attack. But this time, the lullaby was one of peace, not fear. I had been betrayed by my own mother and sister, attacked in my sanctuary, and forced to endure years of legal agony. But I had secured my granddaughter's safety, exposed their crimes, and achieved justice through the legal system. The cost was the complete destruction of my family, but the reward was the absolute, unassailable safety and peace of mind for the only family that mattered, Lily and me. I looked down at Lily's peaceful face, a miniature portrait of her mother, Chloe. I knew the cycle of jealousy, abuse, and entitlement was finally irreversibly broken. The assault in my home had ended with my two aggressors behind bars, and me, the sole survivor, standing firm in the quiet, absolute sanctuary of my love for my granddaughter.